The stories about my life with Baba. Well, first of all, this year, New Year's this year, is 50 years that I'm with Baba. And that was the first time I came to the center was New Year's Eve, 1969. So this year was, like, for me, a special personal year. You know, 50 years means something. I don't know what, but it felt like it meant something to me, for sure. So how it all kind of happened was interesting, in a way, because I'm sure everybody's story is completely interesting and unique to their own experience and relationship with Baba. I grew up in New York City in the Bronx, and during the late 60s, around, in this case, around late 68, we would all hang out in this park in the Bronx, right next to the Bronx Zoo, which is where Baba had also visited. And it was during the hippie days, so it was kind of like a hippie park hangout, and where every night, you know, especially during the summertime or good weather, there might be a couple hundred people hanging out every night. And in that particular, from that particular area and the Bronx itself, there are a lot of Baba people around that have come to Baba that were friends of mine then and still, that I'm sure some of you know some of the people. For example, the Itkowitz brothers, they hung out in that park. Mona Itkowitz, Barry Selman. I mean, by the way, you know, Rita Karish, Larry Karish's wife, I knew her then, you know, back then, etc., etc., even before Baba, like, you know, so we were kind of teenagers in a sense. And but anyhow, from that particular group of people, of all the people that would hang out there in those days, a good amount of us have been with Baba since. I've come to Baba then and since, which is somewhat unusual from a specific area, you know, where we all kind of knew each other prior to Baba and then post Baba. So kind of interesting there. Anyway, so what happened was, around that time, Baba's name was being talked around. There was nothing really concrete, but I had heard Baba's name during those days in the park at that time. And I had, obviously the name had an imprint on me, and also I saw Baba's picture. It was on some kind of book that somebody had Baba's picture. And that was pretty as vague as it was and as it sounds. I had heard his name randomly around the park. At that time, I was 18 years old, and I had seen his face. It was one of the Baba older picture, similar to that picture up there at that time of Baba's life. So anyway, so that was it. And then a few months later, in the summer of '69, during the summer of '69, I decided to go, for whatever reason, to the West Coast, because I had come up and grown up in New York City. I lived in Greenwich Village, and I saw the whole East Coast hippie lifestyle that was really active in those days. And so I had seen that whole scene, and I was also playing music at the time and doing my other work. And so on the East Coast, you always heard about the West Coast hippie scene, you know, the Haight-Ashbury scene and all of that. Somehow that was curious to me. So I bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco. And I got to San Francisco, and eventually I wound up in Berkeley, a few days after I arrived in San Francisco. I went to that area, the Haight area, and Golden State Park, and all of that scene, and I felt extremely uncomfortable. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel grounded at all those first few days in California. And so then I somehow decided to go to Berkeley, because I knew Berkeley was sort of a happening place at that time also. And so that's what I did. I kind of hitched a ride to Berkeley, and I roamed around Berkeley for a couple of days. And in those days, of course, before the internet and cell phones and all of that, the way people communicated for apartments or whatever, places to live, especially during that time, people were much more trusting, open, willing. The whole generation was wide open, really. So the Student Union building at the University of Berkeley, they would have post-ups. People would post up things, either rides to go somewhere, apartment share, rooms for rent, whatever. And so I took one of those. Oh, before that, in this discussion, because this was an era right prior to me being with Baba, in that time, I was still kind of active in that drugs, like the psychedelics, which was very prominent, especially more on the West Coast, I felt, than on the East Coast, even though it was both, but West Coast was way out there on the psychedelic path. And so when I first got to Berkeley, the first thing I did, I don't know if this is good to say this stuff. Is it okay? I don't know, because this goes on forever, right? This is like on tape. Anyway, the first time I got there, all right, Baba, it's all good. The first time I got there, I got to Berkeley, and I bought an ounce of grass and 7 tabs of acid. That was like my first day in Berkeley. And how that happened is even more interesting. Because when I got there, people were soliciting, selling drugs constantly on this Telegraph Avenue, the street that leads up to the campus, the whole deal. So one guy says, da-da-da. I says, okay. So he says, okay, come to this house where we could make this transaction. So I go to this house, and it's basically a hippie house. There's like 20 hippies living in this house, and there's a guy in the middle of the room with a black long beard, and he's basically naked, and he's like the head of the house guy. And that was, that's where the drugs were sold, and he was like the head guy there. Now, that guy, I'm not going to give his name because he's a Baba lover now. And he's been a Baba lover for a long time. All of you, I'm sure, would know this person. He still lives on the West Coast, that's all I'll give you. And he wasn't a Baba lover then, obviously, but see how Baba ties all of our lives in some crazy way. So this is the guy who's naked in the middle of the room with this long beard that was running this whole like shit show going on out there. So, and how I'll just go off for a second, and how recognized this person 10 years later was, I'm on the center. I was back in New York at that point 10 years later, and I'm on the center, and I see this guy, and we're just talking. I didn't physically recognize him or anything like that, and we're just talking. And we're talking. He lives in California, and I said, I was out there in Berkeley. That's when I came to Baba, et cetera, et cetera. He said, really, like I was living in Berkeley, da 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 da. So we kind of like were talking our story back and forth. And I said, and I went to this house, da da da, and there was this guy who was like naked. And it turns out that he was that guy. That was the guy that I met 10 years later back on the Senate, and we're good friends ever since, obviously. But it was like, oh my God, like, you were that guy, So, but it's not appropriate to give his name. that's his story. Anyway, all right, so go back to the Berkeley deal. All right, so I did that, and then, so I take a post-it off the Berkeley Student Union building for an apartment, because I was looking for a place to stay, because my intention was to stay there for however long. I had no real agenda, but I needed a place to live, because I was 3 days on the street, basically, in Berkeley. So I go to this address, and it was on Walnut Street, which was about 2 blocks from the campus, very close to the campus. I go up 2 flights of stairs, and there's a guy sitting there with a little canvas, and he's painting on the canvas. And, we're talking, felt like the right place, so I stayed there. That person who was there sitting with a paintbrush was Joe DeSabatino.
Oh.
You see? The story's getting interesting, isn't it? So, all right, so I'm living there, and so I'm there for a couple of days, like 2 or 3 days, and I walk down the block from this apartment, and there was a health food store, the beginnings of what we now call health food stores in those days, like the juice bar and whatever health foods in those days were out there. And in the front window of the health food store is a huge poster of Meher Baba, and says, "Don't worry, be happy." It's as big as that up there. And it's in the window of this health food store. And I recognized Baba's face immediately, and of course I recognized his name immediately. And had an immediate sort of reaction to it, like, oh shit, like, oh, I know, who this is. Not that I knew who he was, but I know his name, and I know the face and all of that. And on the bottom of that poster in this health food store, it said, public meeting, all welcome to the Student Union building Friday night, 7 o'clock for a Baba meeting. And I'm like, okay, that's 2 blocks away. I'm gonna check this out, right? So I go to the Student Union building. This is all within the first week of me being in California. And so I go to the meeting, and actually it was in a room in the Student Union building, and it was packed. I mean, it was like packed. And I didn't know anybody there at that time. I know who some of the principals were now, like Alan Cohen and Dryfoot, those guys that, Baba had planted out there. But the room was packed. I didn't know anybody. I didn't talk to anybody. But they showed a film that night. There was no real, or maybe I missed any discussion. But when I got there, they had just started the film of the East-West Gathering, Baba's East-West Gathering film, which to me today is still one of my favorite Baba movies to watch, because I think Baba is just giving out so much love. And the masses that are there is incredible to me. So I'm watching the film, and I said, oh my God, there was still this tremendous kind of reaction internally for me. Attraction is the word, attraction. So I bought the discourses they were selling. At that time, there was very few books, obviously, that were printed, other than God Speaks, Listen Humanity, The Avatar, the discourses, and of course out there, God in the Pill, the pamphlet God in the Pill. They were obviously trying to really give that out, So I bought the discourses, and at that time the discourses were in the separate books, the blue books. So I bought the discourses and the God in the Pill thing. So I went back, I wasn't working yet, so I had all day to hang out, and I would pretty much hang out in Berkeley at a park or the campus area, because there was always some crazy shit going on, music, whatever, it was, wild, And so Within 3 days, I had read the discourses. I couldn't stop reading them. But the first one I read was God in the Pill, and in that reading it was God in the Pill, discourses, and it was nonstop reading. Like 3 days, knocked it out. The day before, I will say this: the day before I went to that meeting, at the Baba meeting, I took acid. The day before. But then I went to the meeting, and then I read God in the Pill, and I read the discourses. So immediately, while I was reading the discourses, there was an absolute conviction that no one could say what was being said that I was reading other than God himself. It was unequivocally non-negotiable that this was Christ in human form. I had no reservation whatsoever. It was that clear as a bell. There was no question, there was no doubt, there was no I need to know more, there was nothing like that. It was an absolute conviction before I stopped reading the discourses. It was clear as a bell. This is the deal. Raymond, you're done. So then the only dilemma I had at that point was I had like 4 tabs of acid left and like a half a bag of grass. So after reading what I had read, the first thought was, well, just sell it, get your money back. But then I said, I can't do that because then I take on the karma. In those days, Baba lovers of my generation, we were very like crazy about sanskaras, debt, and karma. Like you wouldn't even grub a cigarette. If you grubbed a cigarette from somebody, you knew you owed them some karmic debt. We were very overly crazy. But for me, being naively initiated into Baba at that point, I realized that I could not sell the drugs because that would do harm to others, because Baba said all drugs are mentally, spiritually, and physically harmful. So I did not want to be responsible for that for anyone else. So that was the little dilemma. So of course I solved the dilemma by flushing it all down the toilet bowl, which probably went into the ocean at that time. We didn't know that. And probably, a few fish had an acid trip. I don't know. I don't know what happened then. But that's what I did. So, and that was immediate, by the way. There was not a moment of doubt. That was immediate after the meeting and after reading the discourses. There was no, what would I say? Baba took it all away. Took the whole, whatever attraction I had to it, whatever experiences, he took it away. There wasn't even like, oh, keep this one for later. Maybe, it's not that bad. You know what I mean? There was none of that. It was clear as a bell that that's what Baba wanted me to do. Never do it again. And it didn't feel like a restriction at all. It felt perfectly natural and right. And never no doubt about it. There was no like, oh, this is crazy. No. So thank you, Baba, for that. Making that so simple, so easy, because I think it would have led to disaster, personally and spiritually, for me. So he just wiped that off real like that. All right, so then I tell Joe DeSabatino, because I'm living in the apartment, and I said, Joe, you got to check this out. This guy's Jesus. This is God. You got to check this guy out. You know what I mean? I said, you got to this is it. And Joe, I didn't know Joe. You know what I mean? I only knew him a few days. But I was already juiced. I was totally, let me say it in the way I would understand it. I was stoned already on Baba, in just after the discourses and seeing the film. I was already gone, and I'm telling Joe DeSabatino, you got to check this out. You got to come to me. You got to read this guy's the real deal. So Joe obviously, we know that Joe took it on pretty much right away. You know, he's like, you read it, you know, da da da, and he was like, okay, you know. So we were both on the same kind of trip in a way with Baba, right away. All right, so I was out there for a few months working, and then I got drafted, because this was the height of the Vietnam debacle. And you guys went in the service? You were? Did you go to Vietnam? So, all right, so I get drafted. So now, I'm rereading and reading in the discourses, violence, nonviolence, you know, all those sections, war, because I got to figure this out. The drug thing was easy. Baba's like black and white. Don't do it, end of story. This was a little more complicated because the societal and cultural thing going on at that time, especially for someone like me at my age, in that side of the fence of the generation, was like, this Vietnam shit ain't cool. You know what I mean? And the drafting, you know, at that time, don't forget, people were burning their draft card, you know, blowing up, you know, draft boards. You know, there was a lot of that going on. So the political side of that, and I'm pretty much non-political, you know, but just I don't like killing anybody, you know, like, you know. So I get drafted. So that's now complicated already. You know, it's like Baba's like really throwing a little, you know. But I'm still like stoned on Baba. I don't really care. And I think the greatest thing or lesson that I've learned in the 50 years of being with Baba is that the childlike trust that I had in Baba's will in regard to my life was the greatest gift. Because as I got older with more responsibilities in life, you know, family and all of that, I realize now that I lost that childlike, fearless conviction of placing my fate in Baba's hands. I just have to say that, because that's, for me, a big lesson. Has become a big lesson with Baba in my personal life. So, at that time, so the big thing then, because, and by the way, Berkeley and San Francisco was the epicenter of political activism against the war. So there was all kinds of like support groups in regard to information supporting people that did not participate in the draft or rejected it and had to figure out how to not do it. One option, of course, was go to Canada. That was out of the question for me. And so I kept reading Baba's words in relation to that area in the discourses of violence, nonviolence, war, and all of that. Violence of the brave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the more that I contemplated it and started thinking about it, I thought at that point, what was called then a CO paper, which meant conscientious objective paper. You can write, which was legal, you could write a conscientious objective paper in relation to your personal feelings or faith, and it would get reviewed and either accepted or rejected. I thought at one point that was an acceptable, honest alternative that Baba would not have any problem with. So in fact, that's what I did. I wrote a CO paper. I brought it to one of those political activist, groups. They said to me it was the best CO paper they had ever read, and it was a slam dunk. They wouldn't take me. For some reason, after that happened, I immediately said, "Screw it. I'm not going to hand it in. I'm going to put my fate in Baba's hands. If I'm meant to go and meant to die, it's his business, not mine." That's what I'm saying about naive faith and trust in my life in regard to Baba's will. In those days, I was a little naive. I don't know if I would have done that today, but naive in the sense of childlike trust is the point. So I decided, nah, if I go, I go. It's all Baba anyway, and et cetera, et cetera. Plus, there was a little sidebar to that in regard to that my father was a World War II 4-year veteran in World War II, 4-year infantry in the Army. He fought the Germans from northern Africa all the way to Italy for 4 years. And so he saw it all, beyond seeing it all. And I had a lot of respect for my father. Anyway, my father was a good man. And I was the only son. I had 3 sisters, and I was the only boy. You know, Italian, he's from the old school, etc. But he was a real good man. So anyway, I said, screw it, I'll just go. It's in Baba's hands. So I go back to New York because of the draft. I had to go to the draft board in New York. And at that time, there was this group called the Weather Underground. I don't know if anybody recalls that. You were in it, Robin?
No, but I remember it for sure.
Anyway, when I got back, the Weather Underground blew up the Whitehall. There was the Whitehall Street. Whitehall Street was the draft board induction place at that time. But the Weather Underground blew it up. So they transferred the induction to the Brooklyn Navy Yards from Whitehall Street when I got back. So I go back, you're home, you know, and so, you know, my parents and everything, and, you know, I got drafted, and and okay. So my father, being from a different world in a sense, is always stoic, you know what I mean? You know, his life was very hard, and it was also men do what men do. Men do what men do, you know, and that's, you know, that was the world he grew up in, the world he lived in. And same as my mother, you know, she grew up in that world, and mothers and wives do what they do. You know, there was not a, what would you say, a discussion about roles in those days, right? People had a role, they knew what it was, and they did what they did. And I have to say that my parents did it exemplary from their perspective, from their experience. And so anyway, so I go back, and so the day, you know, I'm leaving, soon as I got back, it was a couple of days where I had a report, you know, because I was already designated 1A. 1A meant you're draftable. You don't have no exemptions, you're in. You know, so I was 1A. And so I leave, you know, my father, of course, you know, shakes my hand, son, you'll be okay. My mother's crying her eyes out, you know, because I was the only son, and she lost her brother in World War II. So my mother's brother died, so, and I was her only son, so, you know, it's all of that stuff going on. And so I go, you know, I go to Brooklyn Navy Yard. There's like 2,000 guys there that day, getting inducted. And I'm like, wow, this is like amazing, you know? Half of the guys, you know, don't forget, we're still in that era, in that generation, the 69, where, you know, everybody's looks a little wacky compared to the people that were at the military there. You know, there's 2 different worlds going on. You know what I mean? You know. And half the guys are trying to, like, act so crazy and insane and, you know, doing all kinds of things before they got there to actually physically and mentally appear to be crazy and insane. And I was like the opposite in a sense at that point. You know, I was cleaned up, you know. Except my hair was still long, but, you know, I was cleaned up. And so I go through it, and they tell you in the letter, don't bring anything with you, nothing personal, in the letter. Just like, maybe a toothbrush, nothing, you can't bring clothes and luggage, don't bring anything except the clothes on your back. So what I brought was a discourse with me, and a Baba card, like a Baba card, and a flute. I had a wooden flute that I had got in California that I enjoyed playing at the time. So I figured, at least I got a flute and I got a Baba book. I'll be okay. And Baba's pitch, it's enough, So go through the whole thing, and the last part of the induction is a psychological evaluation to see what you're suited to do, what they feel you would be best suited to do. And I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting in the room, and looking back now, it's kind of surreal, the visual image, because it's a room and there's a bunch of guys like me in there, maybe 30, 40 guys at a time, and there's like 5 doors. It's like literally, there's 5 doors. There's a wall with 5 doors on it. And behind those doors is a military, officer, a military officer who's also a psychiatrist behind those 5 doors. And so everybody in the room is like totally nuts. Like, they're like, I'm saying, these guys are real. I'm saying, these guys are like freaking nuts, man. They're like, this is crazy. This war is going to be like, this is a hell of a war I'm going into. It's like a total shit show. They're going to give us guns, So the doors would open independently, and they'd call out a guy's name, and you'd go in the room, and and you wait for your name to be called. And it seemed like, I was waiting like half the day at that point, because it seemed like I was waiting for them to call my name, but it never seemed like my name got called. And I'm saying, hey, I'm like wanting to go. So finally the guy calls my name. I go in the office, I sit there, it's a small room, guys behind the desk, you sit there. And this is after you've done everything, like they prod at your whole body. You're going through everything, the eyes, the ears, the piss in the cup deal, the whole thing, hard, the exercise, you've done all of that. This is like the end. So I go in the room, I sit down, and the guy starts talking to me, and he's asking me questions, he's giving me like these simplistic psychological tests, like, I don't know what they call them professionally, but they're pretty basic, like, what does it mean when a rolling stone gathers no moss? Like, it was simple stuff, cards to look at, what do you think when you see this, like images, it's kind of, and I would give whatever random answer came to me. I didn't know, you don't know I didn't know what right or wrong answer would be, so it wasn't pass or fail. It was just like, I don't know, So then he says to me, do you use any drugs? And I said, no. I said, I used to use drugs, but I stopped using drugs. So then he asked me, well, what drugs did you use? And I told him what drugs I did use. And then he said, well, why did you stop? Because everybody was telling him the opposite, that they were using drugs to try to get out. So I think it piqued his curiosity, because I was one of that generation that said I stopped. So when he asked the question, why, I said, well, because my master says that drugs are mentally, spiritually, and physically harmful. So I stopped. So he said, well, who is your master? So I had the little bag with the book and Baba's picture with the flute with me through the whole thing. So I said, oh, this is my master. See, he wrote this book, and this is his picture. It was a Baba card. It don't like a little "Don't worry, be happy." So he looked at it. He looked at it, and he asked me a few more questions. They're kind of random in a way. And he said to me, at that moment, when the interview was over, he said, "You could go home now." And I said, "What?" He said, "You could go home now." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to reclassify you as a 1Y. He said to me, "I'm going to reclassify you as a 1Y, but make no mistake about it. If the war is declared a national war," because it was not. Vietnam War was not declared a national war, politically. He said, "But if it gets declared, you will be reinstated." I went home. I went back home, because my parents thought they weren't going to see me for a while. So I went back home. My father asked no questions. And I realized later why. But my mother, of course, started crying immediately, because now I'm home. So any worry she had thought about having to worry was relieved. Because at that particular time, my cousin was in Vietnam. And my immediate Dargenio family, we all lived, the 50, 75 of us, and my father's brothers and aunts and uncles, we all lived within 4 blocks of each other in the Bronx. So every Sunday we were at their house growing up, my grandparents' house, growing up, with all the women cooking and wine making and all of that. That would happen every Sunday. And every Sunday when we went there, while my cousin was in Vietnam, all the women would be saying the rosary because he was in Vietnam to pray for my cousin, and my aunt would be crying every Sunday because her son was in Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, so that's the Vietnam story, or the draft story. In relation to Baba leaving, that's the lesson. It always comes back to me. When I, in my life, have left complete fate, my fate, in Baba's hands, he definitely has, quote, done the right thing with me. Whether I knew it at the time or not, I could always look back and say, when I completely trusted my life in his hands, he took care of business, like a miracle, in a sense. So, yes, Bobby.
What did 1Y mean? What was it?
1Y means you're eligible. 4F means you're not eligible for the draft. There's 3 classifications. 1A, 1Y is a deferment. It means deferred. That's all it meant. For example, a lot of guys went to college to get a 1Y deferment, but then they became eligible. They figured in 4 years in college, or 5 or 6 or 7 years in college, the war would be over, right? So the 1Y wouldn't be necessary because there'd be no draft. So that's what it meant. 4F meant you were either physically or mentally completely unacceptable for the draft. 1Y was just a temporary deferment. He gave me a 1Y from a 1A, which was amazing, in a sense. I was probably the most... Oh, what happened during that discussion with the psychiatrist when we were talking, I actually said to him, I have no problem with going to Vietnam. I actually said it to him. I said, I'm fine with being drafted and going to Vietnam. And I said, but I would appreciate if I could be put into a situation in Vietnam where I could be of help, like a medic or something like that. That's all I said to him. If you send me to Vietnam, could I be something of help in that way, in the conversation? But actually telling him I want to go. I'm okay with it. And he said you could go home. My father, back to that last point. My father never asked what happened. And I realized later on why. Because what he witnessed in World War II, I don't think internally, without telling me, he didn't want me to experience any of that as a parent, as a father. So he never asked me why, which was interesting in a way. But my mother was happy, sad tears when I left, happy tears when I came home that day. So that's that story. All right, so we'll move on. So now, so when I come back from California, I had to do the draft thing. But then I went back to hang out at the park, where I hung out, right? When I got back from California, half the park was going to Baba meetings in New York City. In other words, that little time at the beginning, before I went to California, there was Baba's name was being passed around, so to speak. When I got back a few months later, half the park was going to the Monday night meetings, and those Monday night meetings in New York City, what that means is Fred and Ella Winterfeldt, who was running the meetings, and John Bass. And usually you'd get a group of people that had met Baba during his time in New York that would come to those meetings. Those meetings were packed as far as, the room. It was somewhat a room of this size, the Monday night meetings. They were on 57th Street in Manhattan. And I would say most of the time they were packed with people. And at that time, there was when the Mandali would say at the time, or like Fred and Ella and those people, they would refer to us as like the first wave of young Baba people coming to Baba. That's how they would kind of refer our category, because these were like the people in the movies when Baba was here. You'd see that generation of people. Well, they were all still alive basically when I started going to those meetings. So we were really we were the minority, the young people. We were like the crazy young people that were coming to Baba at the time. But for me, and also Harry Kenmore's meetings were on Saturday night on 72nd Street off of Broadway. And so as soon as I came back, some people I knew in the park, for example, like the Itkowitz brothers and others were going to those meetings. So obviously for me, it was like, this is fantastic. I started going to those meetings every Monday. I would go every Monday and Saturday night. Saturday night was the society meetings at Kenmore with Harry Kenmore. And Monday night meetings were Fred and Ella, John Bass, etc. So the Saturday night meetings were led and directed by Harry Kenmore, and obviously the Monday night meetings were seemingly more open in a sense. They were much bigger as far as people, and it was kind of, you didn't know who would be there sometimes, or talk, or present something in relation to Baba, etc., etc., etc. So that was going on constantly. So I was completely, what would you say, engaged with Baba. And me personally, I was personally engaged on seeking out everybody that had met Baba in New York City. I would try to find out who met Baba and find out where they lived and go to their house. And that was a unique experience in and of itself, because of a lot of the people that loved Baba, that stayed with Baba, that met Meher Baba, were very non-involved publicly, believe it or not. We all know the faces that were involved, the Mandali, Elizabeth, Kitty, Jane, and all of those people. Obviously, we know their faces. But you see, like in those movies, like there's a lot of people walking around Baba. Those people were with Baba, but they didn't participate in the public celebrations, I guess you could say, or meetings. So for me, it was like a detective story. Like, who are these people? They're following God, but they don't come and talk about it to nobody. That was kind of interesting to me for some reason. So I had a lot of, gifts in relation to meeting a lot of those people, sitting privately in their home over a cup of coffee and telling me their personal Baba story, which is like, wow. For me it was wow. Wow. Because every time I saw them and realized that, they met God, I was like, oh. All right, so let me say this, back up first. So I grew up in the Bronx, and I went from kindergarten to 8th grade, I went to a Catholic school. I don't know if anybody knows what that means, but it's crazy. I went to a Catholic school where the teachers were nuns, and the priests beat the shit out of you, basically. So, but every day the church was attached to the school. It was called Our Lady of Grace. That's the name of the church and the school, Our Lady of Grace in the Bronx. And in the mornings, so part of everyday Catholic school education, by the way, I actually think it was good education, other than the crazy shit, but the education part was strict and severe, you know what I mean? So you actually had to learn stuff. You couldn't get away with stuff at all. But, the other stuff was a little wacky. But every day, part of the curriculum would be what they would call catechism. Learning catechism, the sacraments, the Christ thing and all of that, the Bible and stuff like that. And that would be part of every day. And a lot of times that would be in church. So, when I was in church, I have a propensity to daydream when I'm bored. When I'm bored, I just check out. I may look present, but I check out, for sure. And then, since I was young, very young. So, that's why it's dangerous for me to be alone all the time, because I check out. I can be reclusive as much as I can be engaging. So, but in this everyday deal of catechism, the priest or whoever would be talking, but it would always be words. It would never kind of like, I would never hear it really or let it penetrate. But what I consciously would do is I would look. Most of you have been in the Catholic Church, an old church where they have all the saints and statues, the stained glass, the saints, the statues, Stations of the Cross, all of that stuff, right? Okay, so that's the kind of church it was. So I would sit there and I would look at all the apostles, like the saints, the apostles, and Jesus and his images and statues. And what I would do would fantasize. I never fantasized about being with Christ himself physically. By the way, I always felt that Christ was the real deal as a child. I always felt that Jesus Christ was God in human form. And for some reason, I felt in my own childlike mind, I felt that they were full of shit. They didn't know that. They would call him the Son of God, but I said, no, that's not cool. He's actually God. In my mind, in my own little childlike mind, I had that association with Jesus. Anyway, my fantasy would always be, I would imagine hanging out with the apostles. Because in my world of growing up and where I grew up, who you hung out with, like if the guys you hung out with were cool, it made you cool. And I felt that the apostles that were hanging out with Jesus had to be the coolest dudes on the planet. So my imagery was, if I could hang out with, like, if I was able to hang out with the apostles, that's like the coolest dudes on the planet, because they're hanging out with the dude on the planet. So obviously, when I came to Baba in these early years, I was hanging out with the apostles. Like, I was realizing my childhood fantasy in the present time. So I was consistently getting blown away in those days when I would meet somebody that hung out with Jesus. Because to me, it was like, there can't be nothing cooler than this, because I'm hanging out with the real apostles of this time. So that was always like a thing, because I realized that when I came to Baba and started meeting the Mandali. I said, holy shit, I'm meeting the guys that I wanted to hang out with when I was a little kid in church. So it really was like wild to me. So now, okay, so I'm going to skip a lot now. So, okay, you guys know about the meetings. Oh, I have to say one thing, because a lot of people do not know, have not had a personal, intimate experience with Harry Kenmore. I suggest that if you haven't, that you read Larry's and read his book on Harry Kenmore. Because a lot of people that didn't know him intimately had a reaction. Because I will say this. First of all, Baba called Harry Kenmore his lion. And there's a reason for that. All you have to do is listen to Harry Kenmore, which you could find, I'm sure, on YouTube or something. Listen to Harry Kenmore reciting Baba's prayers. And you'll see in a split second why Baba called him his lion. Whenever Harry Kenmore was present, in Baba's presence, Baba always only wanted Harry Kenmore to recite the prayers. And if you ever heard him recite them, it's off the chain. Anyway, this guy, for me personally, this is 100% personal, is that even though he had meetings on Saturday night, formal meetings, and then also the Monday night meetings of Fred and Ella Winterfeld, Harry Kenmore, when I came to Baba then, at that age, even though he was stern and not, I guess the word would be today, not warm, not approachable, from my experience, that was completely untrue. He personally gave me Wednesday night meetings, personal, to explain the discourses, Baba's words and meanings. So my personal experience with him is completely different than a non-personal experience. All I would have to say, he was one of the biggest mentors, examples for me of what it really means to love God, which I consistently fall short of. But his integrity in regard to his conviction in relation to God, I have never seen compared to anyone. It was off the charts. And for me personally, that's amazing, because I always said, this guy gets it. You talk about fearlessness in relation to conviction, like nobody I have ever seen. Anyway, and he was crazily fearless. This guy was blind, and he'd go to India by himself, like on a whim. He fell down an elevator shaft. He fell down a subway. If you've been in the subways in New York, he fell off a subway platform. This guy was indestructible. He was also rather large man, physically imposing in that way. But you talk about fearlessness. And by the way, when Baba would have restrictions on nobody visiting, Harry Kenmore was the exception. He'd go on a whim, even if Baba was in seclusion, and Baba always welcomed him, was always happy to see him. And him and Erich were like that. Erich loved Harry Kenmore. Anyway, I just thought about that. Yeah. By the way, so the society Saturday night meetings, okay, what was happening at that time, Harry Kenmore had died in like 71 or 72, I'm not sure. It was 71 or 72. And I was going to both meetings for those years. And like I said, I had a connection with Harry Kenmore that was, strong for me. And plus I loved the Monday night meetings because they were pretty random and crazy in a certain way, because you never knew what was going to happen, so I always liked that too. So, and I loved Fred and Ella and John Bass and whoever else would show up. If it would be Margaret or somebody else, it was like, okay, this is all good. You can't, nothing bad about this. So it was always good. And I used to call Fred Winterfeld Mr. Magoo. I don't know if you've all met him, but I don't know, you know the cartoon Mr. Magoo, because he had the round spectacles, he was kind of short and a little plumpy, and he had that way about him. And by the way, Fred Winterfeldt had infinite energy. Infinite energy. He never slept. I asked him, don't you ever sleep? Because he had actually a job, and his work for Baba was like all of those people, unlimited. They constantly worked for Baba. Anyway, he said, no, I would sleep like, he said he would take like 30-minute energy naps, like in the middle of the night, like sleep 30 minutes, but he was constantly working. And Baba said that Ella, and if you've met Ella, you would immediately experience what Baba said. Sometimes Baba says things we don't have the experience. With Ella Winterfeldt, you would actually have the experience. Baba said she was an angel in her last lifetime. And if you met her physically, you got that impression. She was light as an angel, delicate and light and soft as we would imagine an angel to be. Anyway. Oh, so Harry Kenmore dies. I'm going to both meetings. At that time, what we now know or was called Baba House, everybody knows about Baba House in New York City, right? Baba House had not existed yet. Baba House started to come about right around Harry Kenmore's death. Now, the reason Baba House was instigated, it was instigated by my generation of Baba lovers from the New York City area. They said to the elders, the Baba elders of our day, they said, we want to have a Baba house in Greenwich Village because that's where the youth is, and to give access to our generation, right? So that was the stimulus and the motivation to create Baba House. Anyway, so Harry Kenmore died. So I go to a Saturday night meeting after Kenmore had passed, and this actually I want on tape. I never told anybody this one, except Larry and a couple of people from the society know about this personal experience. And by the way, my closest, oldest friend, John Franieri, I don't know if anybody knew him or knows him, from the Bronx. My oldest Baba friend has passed last year. Anyway, he was important to me personally from the neighborhood and as a Baba friend and just a tremendously beautiful soul. So Harry Kenmore passed. So this guy, this is when the Society for Avatar Meher Baba, in my opinion, went absolutely batshit crazy. So this guy, Mike Levy, who was part of the society, and of course Larry Karish's mother, Anna Rosa, who he knows, and we all know, went a little off when Harry Kenmore died, taking over, quote, the society. Mike Levy took me in their office that Saturday night and sat me down and said, you have to make a commitment decision that if you go to Baba House, this new entity, Baba House, if you go there, you cannot come to the society meetings. Everybody get that? It was like an ultimatum deal. That's the worst thing you could say to me, personally. You know what I mean? Where I'm from, now I would be a lot more congenial about that conversation, but not then. So this guy, Mike Levy, says to me, you got to make a decision. Otherwise, you can't come back here if you go to Baba House. Wherever, that wasn't going to work. So he said, well, you have to leave. So I left, and that was the end of it. I never had any interaction with the society after that. Now, I will say to you two things. I walked out of that office that night on Broadway and cried my eyes out. And the reason why I cried is because from up until that moment, my experience with Baba and Baba lovers was complete welcoming and openness in regard to what my image of true love was at the time, and acceptance. That that moment, what that did for me was bring me back to like, pre-Baba, religion and all of that deal, like who's in and who's out kind of deal. And so it kind of broke my heart for a moment. But what I realized, and ever since that moment, it was clear to me what Baba was saying to me, that attachment to any organization or any person in relation to your relationship with me is got nothing to do with that, with your relationship with me. So it was a gift. It was an absolute gift, because from that moment to this moment, that has never interfered with my relationship with Baba. Being in a group or not in a group, or accepted by a group or not accepted, it has no meaning to me personally anymore. So that was a real gift, because Baba broke, because up until that point I was very attached to the meetings and the sort of, what would you say, brotherhood, the brotherhood of Baba groups and people and all of that. After that, Baba just cleared the path on that one too for me. So it was a real gift. Yeah.
What year are we in now?
When Kenmore died, it was 71, I think 71. 72 maybe, but more, I think 71. My memory, it's 50 years, I'm not, Oh, so, when Baba dropped the body, first of all, during the society, when I was there, for those earlier years, every Baba's birthday, they would have a public celebration at the Hotel Barbizon Plaza in Manhattan. There's a big, theater at the hotel, and it was a public announcement. It was in the New York Times, etc., where it was announced publicly that the public was welcome to. I actually was going to bring. I have the brochure from 1971, the Barbizon Plaza program. So we used to put on a program for the public on Baba's birthday at the Barbizon Plaza. Okay, all right. So in 1970, now, up until that point, I had seen a lot of movies about, and of course, I personally was very enamored by the Eastern Mandali men, especially Adi K. Irani. I don't know why I can tell you that, but that was it. And so I would see films, but it was 1970, and I had not met any of the East. I met all the Western men, like Darwin and all of those guys, and I love Darwin and them, like really cool. But I had the Eastern Mandali, for some reason. I know it sounds a little off, but it was at the time. They, to me, were more. They were like the apostles that hung out with Christ. That was like St. Peter, St. Paul, you know what I mean? It was the bigger deal at the time. And I had never met them. So 1970, Adi K. Irani and Mayurji came to America, to New York, in 1970 for Baba's birthday. And I was like, oh my God, these guys are coming to New York. I'm going to meet like the dude that was with Baba from the beginning, like that guy. All right. I didn't get to my coming to the center story, which is the biggest story, and that happened in '69. But I'm going to come back to it right after this. Is that all right? Am I still good on time and everything? Okay. So Adi K. Irani is coming to New York City, and in 1970, right? And I'm 19 years old. Okay, so I'm like, wow, this is like, I'm really have big expectations on this one coming up. So we have we're gonna have the celebration at the Barbizon Plaza. They're gonna be obviously the guest speakers, Mayurji and Adi K. Irani, and this is right after Baba dropped the body, right? So it's like heavy duty in that way. And all the quote, what could we say? Important people that met Baba are going to be there, Westerners, etc. Right? It's a big deal. And there's going to be a big banquet at the hotel after the birthday celebration and all of that. Okay, somehow I get invited to Anna Rosa, Larry Carish's apartment, Anna Rosa's apartment, where he lived with his mother in Manhattan. Got it? I'm invited to this apartment. I get there. There's no one my age there. There's John Bass, like Fred Winterfeldt, Harry Kenmore Harry Kenmore, Anna Rosa, and Larry Carish. And it was a classic New York apartment, hallway, dining room, formal, living room, regular apartment, New York City apartment. And I'm sitting at the dining room table. She had an oval dining room table. I'm sitting there, and all these adults that have been with Baba are sitting there. Larry's somewhere else, he's showing me like a camera, and I'm sitting at the table with these Baba adults, elders, and I'm 19 years old. I don't even know how I got there or what I'm doing there. And I'm sitting there. The doorbell rings. Adi K. Irani comes walking through the door. Right? Now, Adi K. Irani, at that time, is younger than all of us. He's in his 50s at that time. And he is he fit the image of my impression and to a T and beyond. He comes walking in, man, and I'm sitting at the table. There's an empty chair here. He comes walking down the hallway of the apartment. He's dressed in a Nehru. Everybody know what shark skin suits were in back in the day? Like almost shiny material. Like a dark shark skin suit, Nehru collar. At that time, he had black, salt and pepper hair, slicked back, pocket handkerchief, black leather shoes you could see your face in, right? Like the most badass dude you ever saw in your life, which is exactly what my impression of him always was in all the movies or pictures I ever saw him with Baba. Like, this guy, like, don't mess with this guy. And he comes walking in, and he sits down at this chair. That was the chair they put it, it's the guest there. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, when you're there, but you're not there, you don't want to be there, so you kind of remove yourself, and you're just there physically. You don't even want to be noticed. That kind of feeling, right? Obviously, at my age, at that time, with these people sitting at this table, that's the experience I'm having. Like, holy shit. Like, I don't even know what to do. Or, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't even hear it. Like they're talking, but it's like a cloud. It's like a cloud. So he sits down. He doesn't even acknowledge me at all. He's sitting this close to me. He doesn't acknowledge me. They're talking, adults, and I'm like, I want to just like hide. I want to leave. He doesn't look at me. He don't know. There's no J Baba. J Baba, nothing. He's talking because they knew him. They all knew him, obviously. They knew him physically from contact over the years. And I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, holy shit, this is like unbelievable. I don't know, he's not even looking at me. It's like, in a way, it's like he already knows I don't deserve to be here. It's like, because he knows everything, he knows, like, he's not even going to acknowledge me because I'm not worth it. Like, in some weird way, I'm, processing it like this. And they're talking, and I'm sitting there, and he goes like this. He doesn't say a word to me. At the time, I had a shirt on with a shirt pocket like this. And I had a pack of Camel cigarettes in my pocket. Got it? So, he sits there. Like, it's an oval table. So imagine this is the seat, and he's at the end of that oval table. Right here. Right? He reaches over into my pocket, takes the cigarettes out of my pocket, the whole pack, He never introduced to him, nothing happened yet, except that. He takes the cigarettes out of my pocket, he puts them into his suit pocket, the whole pack. And he says to me, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. And then it totally ignores me for the next 10, 15, or however minutes, and they're talking. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is cool, Raymond. He could have the whole pack. I don't give a shit. Like, yeah, take them, good, And so that was it. That was it. He doesn't acknowledge me, he doesn't talk to me, he doesn't look at me. He just did it real, like, seriously. Takes the cigarettes out of my pocket, puts them in his pocket, and he says, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. And just goes back like nothing happened. Nobody made any, it's like it didn't happen. And I'm like, holy shit. Now I'm really feeling like, oh my God, this is way beyond my understanding. I don't know what's going, these people, this God thing, they're real spiritual, because I don't even hear what's going on. And they're just having coffee and cake like it's nothing. They're not talking, it's like being at your aunt's house. And then, finally, he breaks the ice. And he gives him back to me, and he smiles. Why he did that, I can't tell you. I never asked him. I don't care. I don't know. But it was like that. And then he was cool with me after that. In other words, he put me on. For whatever reason he did that, I don't know. But he definitely had me all the way. So that was my first meeting with the Eastern Mandali members. Okay, so now, let's see.
You went to the center.
Oh, yeah. All right, this is a good one. Anybody need a break here or
I'm
what?
just getting water, keep going.
So, here we are. My first visit to the center, New Year's Eve, 1969. I was in New York City at the time. It was a snowstorm blizzard that day. And I was in my girlfriend's apartment in the Bronx at that time. The girlfriend at that time in the Bronx. And I was in the apartment. It was early evening, and just hanging out. And I got this incredible hit to come to this place, the Mayher Spiritual Center, that I had known about, from meeting Baba people and the movies and all of that, and but I had not come yet. And this was about 6 months after I came to Baba, so it took me a few months to get to the center. So this hit was extremely strong, and at that time, of course, doing anything on the spur of the moment was completely acceptable. Like, who cares, I want to go, and that was the end of that. So I call up the center, because on the back of the discourses, or inside maybe, was like a stamp, print, Mayher Spiritual Center, and the phone number, address, etc. So I had my discourse with me, which I usually had with me all the time, my discourses. For some reason, I would read them constantly. And so it was New Year's Eve, early evening. The snow was coming down. I called the center, and I said, I'm coming. I want to come to the center. And it was actually Jane Haynes at the time, and she said, when do you want to come to the center? I said, now. I said, tonight. I want to come tonight. She said, okay, my dear. She said, when you get to Myrtle Beach, call me back, and I'll have somebody pick you up. That was it. There was no big deal. She might have, there was one deal. Do you use drugs? Because in those days, by the way, part of the criteria, I don't know if they still do it. I heard they didn't, then they did, now they didn't, then they did. But in those days, it was explicit. You had to not have used drugs for 6 months. Elizabeth had that kind of like pretty much down because she knew we were all nuts. So, you know, she took every precaution. So that's what I did. So I called the airport, made a reservation. Those days it was Piedmont Airlines. That was the only airline that flew into the Myrtle Beach from New York City, from LaGuardia, Piedmont Airlines. Made a reservation for the next day. I think the flight was to leave like at 12 o'clock the next morning. Get up, and it's like, you know, 2 feet of snow outside. It's like a freaking blizzard over the night. So I get my friend Doug. I said, Doug, you got to do me a favor. You got to get me to the airport. I got to get on this plane to get to, you know, South Carolina. By the way, at this point, the furthest south I haven't ever been was New Jersey. You know what I'm saying? I never went past New Jersey, period. So, you know, okay, at the same time, all the movies that we all have seen of Baba at the center during the 50s, his trips, there's like hundreds of people. And also all the movies that we've all seen of Baba in the East at Darshan, there's thousands of people. In my mind, I'm thinking I'm the last one to know. Like, I'm going to go to the center, there's going to be like hundreds of people here. Because that was the only image I had. I had no idea what the center, you know, was like that, the way it is. So, I do get to the airport. The plane does leave. It left obviously a lot later. I think the plane ended up, I think I was at the airport for, you know, 5, 6 hours before they like plowed the runways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, in those days, there wasn't as much air traffic. Who's flying New Year's Eve in a snowstorm, you know what I mean? So, like, they kind of got it together. Finally, it was about 6 or 7 o'clock when the plane took off in the evening. So I get off the plane in South Carolina. I call the number, and Jane answers the phone. I said, hi, this is Ray D'Argenio, and I'm here. For whatever reason, she says, where are you? I said, I'm at the Charleston airport. I had no idea. I had no idea what relation physically Myrtle Beach was to Charleston. When I called up the airport and said I wanted to go to Myrtle Beach, they just naturally booked me New York to Charleston. I don't know why. That's what they did. So she says to me, you're at the wrong airport, Jane. I said, oh, all right, you know. And then she says, okay. She says, when you get to Myrtle Beach, now it's around 10 o'clock at night, by the time I got to Charleston, right? She says, when you get to Myrtle Beach, call and we'll have somebody pick you up. And I'm saying, yeah, okay, I got this covered, you know. I'll get there. I'll get where I got to go. All right. So, in those days, you know, the airport obviously wasn't like that, like this. It was like you walk out from the plane on the stairs onto the tarmac into like the little terminal building, you know, et cetera. Even in Charleston, it was pretty like backward then. So, and it was dark, it was night, winter, et cetera. So I get off the plane and I'm walking, I don't know where I'm walking. I see this kid, you know, and I say to him, do you know where the bus station is? You know, because Jane said, you know, go to the bus station, like the Greyhound bus station, whatever, and take a bus. They have buses to Myrtle Beach from Charleston. So that's what I figured to do. So I asked this kid, you know, where the bus station is. So he says, yeah, it's a few blocks away. I'll give you a ride. He worked at the airport, and he was getting off work. And he was basically, I guess you could say, the like a southern redneck hippie is the best way I could describe it, from where I'm coming from, from New York. But he's like, he's a nice kid. He's offering me a ride to the bus station, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. So he drives me to the bus station, and the bus station's closed because it was like, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And it's and it's like they have the thing on the window, it opens up at 10 in the morning, like that. So he says to me, like, where you going? I was just going to stay in the bus station all night. I didn't care, really. At that point in time, at that age, it didn't matter to me. I've slept in worse places than that at that time. So he says, where you going? I said, to Myrtle Beach, which I have no idea where it is. He says, I'll drive you there. I'll give you a lift. I said, really? You give me a lift to Myrtle Beach? He says, yeah. I said, okay. Okay. So he said, so I get back in the car. I get back in the car. And we're driving. He says, I'm just going to stop at my friend's and pick up a friend to drive there and back with. And I'm saying, yeah, this is cool. Yeah, whatever. I'm getting a ride to Myrtle Beach. I'm like going to the center. I'm like, okay. So we start driving, and we're driving, and like unlike New York City, which is a completely different universe, there's lights everywhere on streets and stuff. I'm not used to, I don't have any relation to what this looks like. Everything is dark, there's no people, it's dark. It's like dark. And so we're driving, and we end up, he's on a road, and the road is like this, like a dirt road, ends up like off a paved road to a dirt road. And I'm like, I never even been on a dirt road, And so, and there's trees, but the headlights, you just see the trees that are next to you, like if you're driving up in the mountains at night. And we're like driving through this road, like dirt road. It's bumpy and dirt road. We're driving, and I'm like, we're going somewhere, going for the ride, And all right, so we get to like the end of this road. And there is, all of a sudden, you could see it as we're approaching, tremendous light. Like there's lights. Like I see like bright lights that we're driving towards. We get right there, and there is lights everywhere. There's FBI, DEA, county, local cops sprawling the place, and lights everywhere. And I'm like, holy shit. So immediately when we got there, they stopped the car, right? And they told us, he took the guy, said, pull the car over here and get out of the car. And I'm saying, wow, this is unbelievable. So they said, and it's a trailer in the woods where this guy, his friend, and the quote hippie rednecks are living. This trailer in the woods. I never even been in a trailer. I never saw a trailer, that people live in a trailer. I mean, I lived in the projects, but that's different than a trailer. You know what I mean? So we go in to the trailer, up 3 steps. There's all these law enforcement all over the damn. There's that freaking helicopter, with the light in the middle of this freaking woods somewhere. I'm like, oh my God. So go in the trailer. In the trailer, there's a couch, you walk in the trailer and there's like a couch there. There's like 4 guys on the couch with handcuffs on. There's the kitchen table. It's got drugs and guns on the freaking kitchen table. This is what I see when I walk in. And I said, holy shit. I'm done. Baba, are you insane? I said, like, what? It's over. It's over. The FBI agent at the table, DEA, FBI guys at the table, and the rest of the guys, the rest of the law enforcement guys are ripping the trailer apart. They're taking the ceiling down. They're taking the floor up. They're coming out with bags of shit and guns and all kinds of crazy shit. And I'm saying, oh my God. So when we walked in, the guy sitting at the table, he says, you got identification? You know, to both of us. The guy, I don't even know the kid's name that drove me. I don't know his name yet. He says, you got identification? All I had in those days, you didn't need identification to get on a plane. You didn't need like what you need today. I had a plane ticket with my name on it, etc. You know, in the Charleston, New York, Charleston. And again, the only thing I had was a little bag with a couple of shirts in and Baba's discourse and his card in the bag that I took from New York. So I give him the plane ticket, right? And he looks at the plane ticket and he says, sit down. And there's like 4 or 5 guys sitting on the floor that were in the trailer that are under arrest already. They got it's the wildest scene I have ever. In all my years in New York, with all the crazy shit that I saw, I never saw this. This was like out of a freaking movie. And I'm saying, Baba, this cannot be my movie right now. I mean, you know, like, Baba, I gave up all this shit, and now you put me in this with these crackheads? Like, you know. So, I'm sitting there, and I'm watching the whole scene. And I'm saying, no. There's no way I'm getting out of this. There's no way that's going to happen. So these guys, they're bringing more stuff. There's guns on the table. There's bags of like pills, Tunals in those days, bags of grass. There's all kinds of shit going on here, right? These guys are like almost laughing, these redneck hippies, and they're like in handcuffs. They're bringing guys out. They got FBI guys. They got this place covered like ants. They're ripping the trailer apart on top of it. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, Baba, this has got to be the craziest thing you've ever done. I said, I gave up drugs to follow you, and now you put me in a situation that I could never get out of. There's no way I can even call anybody. I can't even do any of it. And I'm just sitting there. The guy at the desk, he decides that I'm the New York connection because I'm the only guy there that's not from there. That I'm the New York guy that's coming to make the drug purchases. And I'm looking at him. I'm literally looking at the guy. And I'm saying to myself, what do you say now? What are you going to say to this guy that's going to somehow change what everybody thinks? So I say to him, I go like, I'm like, I try to be like really calm, and I say to him, I said, look, I don't know these people. I don't know anything about what's going on here. In fact, I don't even know the guy that took me here. I said, I got off a plane in Charleston. I'm going to Myrtle Beach. He offered to give me a ride. I said, and also, and I had my bag with the Baba's book. I said, I'm going to the Mayher Spiritual, like I figured he knew, but he knew. I actually thought everybody knew the Mayher Spiritual Center. So I said, you see, and on the back it was the stamp in the book, the Mayher Spiritual Center. And I said, I have a phone number. I had Jane's phone number. I said, I have a phone number. They expect that if you call, they will tell you they expect me there. But I didn't want him to call because I didn't want Elizabeth Patterson to ever know. By the way, she never knew. They never knew this scenario because I never, ever wanted them to know anything about it. So, but in my mind, that was the only way out, that possibility of getting out of this mess. So he seemingly listened to me, and I showed him the phone number. I showed him Mayher Spiritual Center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and then he said, go back there and sit down. After I had said that, go back and sit down. So now I'm like, it didn't work. He's not buying it. He's not buying it, right? So now, it's a few hours go by, believe it or not, because they are now processing everything. They're writing down the guns they found, the drugs they found, and the people, they found things where, and they're putting these guys in the cars to take them away. And I'm saying, if they take me to jail, there's no, I can't get out. I can't call my parents, I can't call anybody in relation to the situation. God forbid I even think of calling the center and say, by the way, I'm in jail on a drug bust. I will be totally, banned, right? Especially with Elizabeth at those days. And I'm like, holy shit. So everybody, they're kind of like processing everything. Everybody's like getting taken out. And the same guy at the kitchen table says to me, he says, he says, you could leave. Out of the freaking blue. He says, you can leave. You leave. So, I get up. He gives me the plane ticket back. I get up. The first thought I have in my head is like, where am I going? I don't know where the fuck I am. How am I going to get out of here? What are you talking about? I'm thinking to say, like, what are you, crazy? But I didn't, So I said to him, I said, well, I don't really have transportation to go to, I'm saying it like this, like, I don't really have transportation to Myrtle Beach. He said, how'd you get here? I said, that guy, because we were both the last two guys sitting there. I said, that guy took me here. I didn't even know his name. He said, that guy took you here? He said, you and him leave. The guy that took me there, they give him his keys back to the car. I, walk to the car, is this for real? Is this for real? We're actually going to leave, but maybe they're going to shoot us on the way out. I don't know what's going on. So we get in the car and we drive out. And I say to so we're driving out. I say, look, man, just drop me off somewhere, where I can get somewhere, I don't care. He says, no, man, I'll drive you. He says, the same kid says to me, no, man, I'll drive you to Myrtle Beach. And I'm saying, all right, Bob, what could happen next? Okay, sure. You want to drive me? Sure, no problem. I don't know where it is. Drive me there. So we're driving there, and in those days, down here especially, there was no FM radio. You barely got an AM signal. So he's, and there's rock music, because he's like a young kid too. And so he's got the radio on. While we're driving to Myrtle Beach, the news comes on the radio and says, the largest drug bust in South Carolina has just been processed in Charleston, which is the drug bust that I was at. And he says to me, so we're driving, and I go, holy shit, that's we were just there. He says, yeah, man. He said, everybody I know right now is in jail. That's what he said to me when we heard the news driving to the Myrtle Beach. He said, all my friends are now in jail except me. And he drives me to Myrtle Beach. So we get to Myrtle Beach, and I don't know where the center is, so I don't know really where to tell him to go, And he doesn't know because he's from Charleston. So we get to Myrtle Beach, and he tells me we're actually now in Myrtle Beach. And so, Mammy's Kitchen downtown? Mammy's Kitchen? So that's where we were. He said to me, we're in Myrtle Beach, so where do you go? I said, I don't know, but I knew when Jane said, when you get to Myrtle Beach, that somebody will pick me up. So he told me we were in Myrtle Beach, so I got off at Mammy's Kitchen. That's where I got off. right? It's now 4 o'clock in the morning when I got dropped off. So now my dilemma is, hey, she told me to call when I got to Myrtle Beach, right? So I call. And I say, hi, this is Raymond. And she goes, where are you? I said, I'm at Mammy's Kitchen in Myrtle Beach. She says, okay. There was a payphone. It was next to the Piggly Wiggly, you know, a regular old phone booth payphone. She says, stay there. She says, stay where you are. Mammy's Kitchen, she said, stay there. I'm going to send someone to pick you up. So now I'm thinking, in this little short period of time, while I'm standing on the street, you know, freezing at 4 o'clock in the morning after this crazy experience, I'm thinking, they can never find out what just happened. Like, if they ask me, well, how come you got here for whatever, I have to kind of not lie, but make up a story. Because I was very anticipating that they cannot know that there was any involvement with drugs, even though if I was innocent. It would just not feel right. And they would not believe me anyway. You know, so I'd have to make up something. So somebody picks me up. I think it was Howie Meyer, actually, who picks me up, brings me to Del Ruba at 4 o'clock in the morning, to Del Ruba. And I don't know where, you know, I don't know the scene at the center. I never had met Elizabeth, but I knew who she was. Believe me, I knew who she was, and and Kitty, etc. And I knew Elizabeth was that person. Kitty escorts me. She sits me down on the couch in the living room at Del Ruba, and Kitty says to me, "Do you have a torch, you know, and a towel?" And I said, "No." So she brought me out a flashlight and a towel. And then, to my shocking surprise, Elizabeth Patterson walks out of her bedroom, completely dressed. I don't know if you've seen or met Elizabeth when she, you know, she had the classic, what do you say, skirt and pants of that era. I don't know what they call it. And she had white pearls on at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, and she came up to me. I was sitting on the couch, completely like zoned from everything. Being there, meeting them, the experience I had getting there. I didn't know, you know, it was all surreal to me at this point. And she says, she came up to me and she stood in front of me. Thinking back now, I realize I didn't even get up in respect. I didn't even stand up. You know, which I should have done. But I was sitting there, and the way she came out, I was like in shock and awe, actually, because I thought I would either get reprimanded or something, or get questioned, which she did none of those. And she looked at me, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Okay. And anything you need, Miss Kitty and Miss Jane will take care of it." And she went back into the bedroom. And that was my first meeting with Elizabeth. I actually took a breath after that when she, you know, went back in, and because she didn't question me, she didn't judge, she didn't do anything that I was fearful of. She just came out and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm okay." And like, that was it, in a way. So I was kind of happy about that. And then somebody took me to the cabin, they put me in the lantern. Now, this is like, late in the morning. I didn't physically see the center. I'm just taken to this cabin in the woods and at the Lantern. And I'm thinking, this is only, like my naive thinking at the time, is that I'm thinking I'm going to wake up and see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, like in the movies, and that everybody knows he's Christ. I'm like kind of late to the party, et cetera, et cetera. And I get up the next day in the Lantern, and it's like really quiet, it's like really quiet. And I just start like walking around a little bit, it was like really early, it's still like kind of, what would you say, hyped up from the whole experience. Like I'm still processing what had happened that night, the whole thing. Like I still can't get my head around it, and how actually got out of it somehow, with no consequences from the center or the police. There's like no, like somehow I skated through everything, and I'm waking up, in the Lantern. So I walk around, and it's like literally dead quiet. There's nobody there. I'm waiting for like crowds of people to come, and I don't see anybody. I walk into like the original kitchen, and I don't see anybody, and I'm like, wow, this is like really, the whole thing is like eerie and strange in a way to me at this point, because I have this image of seeing people at the center with Baba and all these people I met that have been here, and and I'm saying, wow. And it turned out I was the only person on the center. And in contrast, in reflection, that was like, 50 years ago. Imagine now, New Year's Day, nobody on the center, or New Year's Eve. I was physically the only person here, which blew me away also. So now I don't know what to do. What am I doing? Food? I don't know. What do you do here, right? There's like nobody. There's no instruction going on. There's no like, Jeff is not there hanging out with everybody. And I'm like, wow. So this is like cool. And I'm checking out the place. I'm looking at the cabins. I'm going into the cabins and stuff. And but Jane came to my cabin, and for the next few days, she basically mothered me is the best way I could say it. I rode around the center with her, Elizabeth's big station wagon, the country Squire Chrysler wagon, and she's telling me about the center and things and Baba and doing whatever I needed, all of that stuff. And I'm hanging out. So in my mind, I'm saying to myself, okay, whatever I thought about all the people being here, that's obviously not the case, right? So I'm checking out the cabins, and I'm saying to myself, okay, at that time, by the way, it was $3 a night to stay. $3 a night to stay. So my apartment in New York was $125 a month at that time. I had a one-room studio in New York. It was $125 a month. So I'm saying, a month here is only $90. Like, and as far as I'm concerned, I was already home, even then. I said, this is it, I'm done. He's God, this is his home, I don't want to go nowhere, I'm done. So in my mind, I'm saying, I'm going to rent one of these cabins. I'm going to live here. It's $90 a month. I'll get a job, I'll figure this shit out. This is easy for me, I'll make it work. $90 a month, I'll pick one of these cabins, and I'm done. And I live at the center. I had no idea how crazy that idea was. So Jane, I said to Jane, we were talking, I said, I think I'm going to live here. I think I'm going to live here. And she says, in her very unique way, her style of talking, I can't imitate, I don't want to imitate actually. She says, oh my dear, live where? I said, here, in one of the cabins on the center. Because I'm saying nobody's here. Well, that's the big deal, right? And she goes, she holds my hand. She takes my hand and she goes, "Oh, Raymond, dear, you can't live on the center, but you could always come back and visit." That's how she smoothed it out. So then I realized, don't push the issue, you know, like with these people. You can't push it. So just be cool with that. And I said, oh, I see, okay. So I was a little disappointed in a way that, because I figured $90 a month, that's a breeze. I'll get a job in a heartbeat and make it work. But no, then I figured you can't do that. So that was kind of my first adventure to the center. But which was quite unusual for a story for first coming here, as far as everything that had happened in that, what would you say, 24-hour period of actually physically getting here.
How long did you stay?
I stayed a few days at the time.
You had a ticket.
Yeah, I had the plane ticket going back. But, I was going to cancel. I was ready to move into, like, the Lantern, Twins. I didn't care, And so, it was kind of cool. But, in the between then and now, obviously, there's always been, for me personally, like experiences with Baba where he's definitely put his thumb directly on it, where there's no way I could have, on my own, handled the situation and have it come out good, or easier. Because any time I've been in a really kind of do or die scenario where you just say, okay, Baba, I give up, he somehow, in my case, has been able to give me a break on the big ones. The little ones, not so much, because everybody goes through pain, loss, and human, emotions and experiences. But when I look back on the real big ones, he's given me a pass, And so anyway, so that's pretty much. I have a few more stories, but I'm not going to keep you here all day. But I did move here in '76 from New York to actually play with some Baba musicians that were here. Because every time I would come usually between '69 and '76, I would come probably twice a year from New York. And, we'd just come and drive down, whatever. And the musicians that were living here at the time was, I don't know if you people all know them, I know Bobby does, Michael Miller and Jack Austin. And they had a little band here, and they would play at, like, the only place to play, which was the Officers Club and the Holiday Inn once in a while. And every time I would come, they would beg me to move down here and join the band, et cetera, et cetera. And every time they would ask me that, I would say, what are you guys, nuts? I said, I'm playing 6 nights a week in New York City in one of the hottest music areas of the world, and you want me to come here and play once a week at the Air Force Base. And it ain't going to happen. But it did actually happen in '76, because my band had a tour in Puerto Rico, and by the time I got back, I was so exhausted from dealing with the musicians that, because I was responsible for the contracts, one guy was one guy was having parties all day in his hotel room with a bunch of Puerto Rican boys, and the other guy was at the House of Ill Repute every night, and the singer we brought, she thought she was Diana Ross, and the people were, it was just insane. I had just had enough. So I called up Jack and Michael Miller and said, okay, I'm coming down. So I packed up my truck like that week and came down and joined that band. And et cetera, et cetera. So I stayed here for 2 years. My oldest son, Raman, was born here. That's what, by the way, his mother, my wife at that time, was the singer in that band that I came to join. I had never met her, but when I came to join that band, that's when I first met Lee. And we ended up obviously getting married, and my first son was born here. And then that kind of leads to an interesting story, because at that time, after my son was born, for some reason, I felt the impact of responsibility as a father and a husband. All of a sudden, I was 27 years old at that time, and I was a little confused because at that time here, work income and education was quite limited. And so I went to talk to Kitty one day. I sat with Kitty, and I said, Kitty, you know, and my son had just been born a few months earlier. And I said, Kitty, I don't know if I should move back to New York, et cetera, et cetera. I said, I have a job offer in Scarsdale, New York. And at that time, you know, a lot of books about Baba's day-to-day life and all the places he'd been hadn't been recorded yet. So at that time, I did not know that Baba spent 3 months in Scarsdale. I did not know that at that time for his recuperation from the accident in '52. So I was talking to Kitty, and I said, Kitty, I don't know what I should do, you know, in relation to, you know, being a father and all that business. And I told her about the situation. She said to me two things in that meeting. She said, first of all, your son Raman needs the best education you can possibly give him, and it's not going to be here. It'll be in New York. That was the first thing she said. The second thing she said, you must take the job in Scarsdale. Now, knowing Kitty, who actually been in Scarsdale during Baba's recuperation, never mentioned it to me that you should take the job because Baba was there. No, she didn't say a word about it, other than the two things that I just told you. While I was managing the store in Scarsdale, because that's what I did do, by the way. And by the way, my son Raman, my oldest son, from day one, which she knew, Kitty, in my opinion, was extremely intuitive. That's all I want to say about Kitty Davy. But she would never give you the reasons why she would tell you something. She would kind of give you advice about something, but not give you background. You would kind of find out later on why she was right about what she suggested. So anyway, I did take her suggestion as far as doing exactly what she said. He went to Ivy League school, and he graduated #1 in his class with 2 degrees in 4 years at UPenn, and that's not easy to do. Secondly, he's also basically is the most informative voice for the financial committee on the Senate right now for the last few years. You know, as far as analyzing the center stuff and everything. In my opinion, Kitty, I'm not saying consciously knew all of what his life would be, but somehow she knew. Because she said distinctly, Raman needs the best education you can give him, and it's not going to be here. And he's probably, in his generation, in the worldly context, the most successful, from the worldly perspective, successful Baba lover out there. His worldly success is off the charts. But on the other side of that, his humility and generosity is equally off the charts. And his relationship with Baba. So, yeah. So this job in Scarsdale, by the way, so I'm working there. I know nothing about, at this time, it was in the mid-'80s at this point. And in my store in Scarsdale, I had, like, let's say counters just like that, a counter behind and a counter like that faced the customer side. And I had Baba's picture on the counter behind. A guy comes in to the store, and he says to me, I know who that is, pointing to Baba's picture. And I said, you know who that is? He says, yeah, he stayed in my house. That's Meher Baba. So that's another whole story. But the point is, what I'm saying is that Kitty knew all of that. And the two things that I asked her, she was distinctly directing me to do exactly those two things, which turned out to be exactly right in relationship to whatever you want to say, my fate, etc., my son's fate, etc. And this guy, Mr. Ferris, who this guy, that's how Baba, you know he's God, no matter what. When he was, had to go to New York to see his doctors in New York to convalesce after the car accident, Baba requested Elizabeth to not be in the city itself, but be close to the city, but in a quiet location, So Elizabeth Patterson, through her vast New York connections, which are unbelievable, she had a friend, and Scarsdale even then always has been, is, and will be a very exclusive high-end, like the one percenters we all hear about. You have to be in the one percenters to live in Scarsdale, period. So she had a friend that lived there, and she asked her friend, who, they didn't follow Baba, they knew nothing about Baba. Elizabeth asked a friend that could Baba and his entourage stay at her house, but the owners of the house had to leave. Now, for that to happen, it has to be God behind it. These people left their house in Scarsdale, and didn't know who this person Elizabeth's bringing in, and who else is coming with this Indian guys from Indian people. They're going to come to her house, and they have to leave their house and not live in it. Only God could arrange those kind of things, in my opinion. Because if somebody ever asked me, like Ken, if you ever asked me, hey Ray, leave your house because I got friends that are coming from India, and could you just not come back for 3 months, and you can't meet these people, you know what I would tell you, Ken? Even though I love you, you know what I'm saying? It ain't going to happen. So this guy, Ferris, he's telling me the story about how it was arranged. And I'm like, holy shit. So I said, did you meet Meher Baba? He said, no. He said, but my wife did. The best part of that story, when I got to know him and all of that, was the woman of the house, the wife, told Elizabeth, this is how you know he's God too, told Elizabeth, said, okay, we agree, but in those days, they had most of them had like house nannies and cooks and servants, clean, and they had a black maid and cook. So the woman says to Elizabeth, well, would you like the maid to stay, this way she could clean and help out? So Elizabeth, of course, had to ask Baba who would be allowed to stay. So Baba said, yes, the black maid stays. So the people that owned the house had to leave, but the black maid got to stay, which I think is a great irony. But for me, the curiosity of why would Baba bless this family, because no matter how you look at it, whether they knew about him or not, there's a reason Baba picked that family to be in there, to bless that house and that family. So that was my curiosity. I like connecting dots. So as I got to befriend this man, I realized why. Have we all heard of Thomas Merton, the Christian mystic, Thomas Merton? This man, Mr. Ferris, was Thomas Merton's benefactor, and in regard to supporting Thomas Merton, basically in regard to all his worldly needs. Mm-hmm. And I felt that that's why Baba, in some way, not that I know, in some way blessed this family, because of the selflessness of this particular man that reached out to this extraordinary, in my opinion, a true Christian mystic. I think on the saintly level, that not just a religious person, because if you read Thomas Merton, it's not coming from like the gross world kind of deal, as far as God is, the relationship with God. So I think Baba in some way, blessed him in that way. Plus I found out more about his past. Like even during the 40s and 50s and stuff, this particular man was an anti-war activist, anti-nuclear bomb activist, before I was born. He was that kind of man even then. Very progressive, forward-thinking, and selfless work in the world. So somehow Baba maybe appreciated that, but they were truly blessed. Jai Baba.